Can you believe that at 75 years old, a man can still endure 18 hours lost in America's most unforgiving desert and come out alive to tell the tale? I'm Robert McKenzie, a Vietnam War veteran, and 3 weeks ago, I lived the most intense experience of my 75 years of life in the arid lands of California's Mojave Desert. What began as a personal survival challenge turned into a desperate fight for my life alongside my most loyal companion, Duke, a retired military German Shepherd who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Have you ever wondered what really happens when your aging body is tested to the extreme, when every drop of sweat can mean the difference between life and death? At 75, my wrinkled skin and muscles no longer have the resilience of a 20-year-old soldier. But my mind still holds decades of military training and combat experience. Duke, even at 8 years old, retains the sharp instincts of a war dog trained to save lives in conflict zones. It all started on a Tuesday morning in Barstow, California. I had planned a 12-hour desert survival challenge, something I did regularly to prove to myself that age is just a number. Have you ever been there? That urge to test your own limits even when everyone tells you should be home, resting? I carried only the essentials: a bottle of water, some energy bars, a survival knife, and of course, Duke by my side. The Mojave Desert is known for its scorching temperatures, which can reach 50 degrees Celsius during the day and plummet below freezing at night. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, and coyotes make every step a potential death trap. But what I didn't expect was that a simple navigational error would lead me into a survival adventure that would test not only my physical endurance but also my canine companion's incredible military intelligence. At 6 a.m., we set off confidently. By 8 a.m., it was clear something was wrong. My GPS had lost signal, my visual references didn't match the map, and Duke began exhibiting behaviors I hadn't seen since his military service days. Can you imagine the despair of realizing you're completely lost in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, responsible not only for your own life, but also for that of your best friend? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover about the survival skills of an elderly man and his war dog may completely surprise you. The next 18 hours would reveal survival techniques I learned in combat, canine instincts that saved our lives, and a partnership between man and animal that challenged all my assumptions about age, endurance, and determination. What happened during that freezing night in the desert forever changed my perspective on what it truly means to age with purpose. The first hour was when reality began to set in. The sun was already high, my water reserve was half full, and Duke was panting more than usual. It was at that moment that I realized something extraordinary. My companion wasn't just trying to keep up with me, he was taking the lead in our survival. His military instincts awakened in a way I hadn't seen in years, sniffing the air, analyzing the terrain, and guiding me down paths my human experience would never have chosen. You know, as I'm here telling you this story, I keep thinking about how many people have gone through, or will go through, extreme situations in their lives. Not necessarily in the desert, but moments where we need to discover what we're truly made of. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to find a strength you didn't even know existed? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what has touched you most so far in this story. It could be a personal experience of overcoming adversity, a moment with a special animal, or simply how you feel when you think about challenging your own limits. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who, like us, believe that age doesn't define our limits. Every comment, every like, every new subscription shows me that there's a real community of people willing to live intensely, regardless of their age, and that honestly moves me deeply. If you're resonating with this message, click the thumbs up below, and if you're not yet subscribed, press that red button, because stories like this, of true overcoming, of partnership between man and animal, of discovering that we can do more than we imagine, are what you'll find here every week. Because what happened in the second hour of our desert odyssey made me realize that Duke was no longer just my companion. He had become my survival instructor. That's when he began demonstrating techniques I had never witnessed, not even during my most intense military training. Before I delve into what really happened in those 18 hours that changed my life, I need you to understand who Duke and I are, because our story of partnership began long before this desert challenge. My name is Robert McKenzie. I'm 75 years old, and I served 3 tours in Vietnam between 1968 and 1971 as an infantry sergeant. During those hellish years in the Asian jungle, I learned that the difference between life and death often lies in the simplest details, like conserving water, recognizing danger signs, and most importantly, trusting your partner. When I returned from war, I carried with me not only the physical scars, but also a profound understanding of survival that has stayed with me for the rest of my life. I worked for 35 years as a survival instructor for the U.S. Army, teaching young soldiers the techniques I learned firsthand in the heat of battle. I retired at 65, but I never stopped pushing myself. It was as if each challenge reconnected me with that young soldier who survived the impossible in the jungles of Vietnam. Duke came into my life 4 years ago, just as he was retiring from the military. A purebred German shepherd, bred and trained specifically for highly complex military operations. He had served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, working with special units in search and seizure operations, explosives detection, and the rescue of wounded soldiers. When we met at the Military Animal Rehabilitation Center in San Diego, it was an instant connection between 2 veterans who understood the weight of service. Duke is no ordinary dog. His military training included navigation techniques in hostile terrain, water detection in arid environments, identification of natural threats like snakes and predators, and most importantly, he was conditioned to protect and guide humans in life or death situations. During his years of service, Duke directly saved the lives of at least 12 soldiers, whether by finding wounded soldiers on battlefields, detecting ambushes, or locating water sources during extended missions in the Afghan desert. When I decided to adopt Duke, it wasn't just for companionship. I recognized in him a spirit that mirrored my own, someone who had faced the worst life could throw at him and emerged stronger. We'd spent the last 4 years training together, not just physical exercises, but reconditioning our survival instincts. Every week we'd hike 12 miles through the Sierra Nevada mountains, practice orienteering techniques without electronic equipment, and I'd watch as Duke maintained his sharp military reflexes even in retirement. At 75, my body obviously doesn't have the same endurance. My knees ache after long walks, my vision isn't perfect, and I need more time to recover from intense exertion. But my mind remains sharp. Decades of experience compensate for the loss of physical vigor, and most importantly, I learned to work as a team with Duke in a way that maximizes our individual strengths and minimizes our weaknesses. The decision to undertake this specific challenge in the Mojave Desert was not random. Throughout my military career, I'd always heard that the desert was the most honest environment in the world. It doesn't lie, it doesn't hide dangers, and it tests you directly and relentlessly. I wanted to prove to myself that, even at 75, I could still face this ultimate test. Duke, of course, would be my partner, as he had been in all our previous challenges. The planning was meticulous. I studied topographic maps of the region for weeks, identified visual landmarks, and plotted a circular route that would return me to my starting point in approximately 12 hours. I carried only the essential equipment: a 1-liter water bottle, 3 energy bars, my military knife that has been with me for 50 years, a mechanical compass, a basic first aid kit, and sunscreen. Duke brought his military collar with identification and a small bag of food. On the morning of our departure, I woke at 4:30 a.m. in my RV parked near Barstow. Duke was already awake, as he always was when he sensed a special day ahead. His eyes shone with that intensity I recognized from his active duty days. I ate a light meal, hydrated both myself and Duke well, and by 5:45 a.m. we were ready to leave. The sky was still dark when we took our first steps into the desert. The temperature was pleasant, around 18 degrees Celsius, but I knew that would change drastically in the coming hours. Duke walked to my left in the standard military stance, alert but relaxed. The first few kilometers went exactly as planned. I maintained a steady but not exhausting pace, conserving energy for the hotter hours to come. It was as the sun began to rise that everything began to go wrong. My first visual reference, a specific rock formation I'd identified on the maps, simply wasn't where it should have been. I consulted my compass, reviewed my calculations, but something was definitely off. Duke began showing signs of restlessness I hadn't seen in years. He stopped frequently, lifted his head, sniffing the air intensely, and his ears were constantly pricked up in a high alert position. It was at this point that I made my first critical mistake. Instead of stopping, completely reassessing my position and possibly retracing my steps, I decided to continue based on my experience and intuition. I trusted that I could reorient myself using the next visual cues. This overconfidence, common in people with a lot of experience, nearly cost us our lives. At 8 a.m., 2 hours after departure, reality set in brutally. I recognized absolutely nothing of the terrain around us. My GPS had completely lost signal due to the rock formations in the area, and my visual references didn't match anything I'd studied on maps. Even more worrying, Duke had completely changed his behavior. He now walked a few meters ahead of me, constantly glancing back to confirm I was following him, and his movements had that military precision I recognized from the stories I'd heard about his combat missions. It was at this moment that I realized we were no longer in a planned survival challenge. We were in a real life or death situation, lost in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, with limited resources and the clock ticking against us. The temperature had already risen to about 30 degrees Celsius and was still rising rapidly. Duke had taken command of the operation, and as experienced as I was, I recognized that I had to follow my military partner's lead. The first critical decision Duke made was to completely change our direction. Instead of continuing in the direction I had chosen, he began guiding me on a route that seemed to make little sense from a traditional navigational perspective. I initially resisted, trying to keep him on the path I believed was correct. But Duke was persistent, using nonverbal communication techniques he had clearly learned during his military training. He would look me straight in the eye, walk a few feet in the direction he wanted to go, then stop and look back until I decided to follow him. The second hour was when I realized Duke wasn't just trying to find a way out. He was applying specific desert survival techniques his military training had taught him. His frequent stops weren't random. He was systematically testing the wind direction and humidity, and looking for signs of water or vegetation that might indicate sources of hydration. It was like watching a seasoned professional at work in his field of expertise. Duke began implementing a movement strategy I'd never seen before. Instead of walking in a straight line, he followed a zigzag pattern that initially seemed inefficient, but I soon realized he was keeping us in the shade of the rock formations for as long as possible, minimizing our exposure to the increasingly intense sun. His stops were strategically placed in spots with better natural ventilation, allowing us both to cool off briefly before continuing. As the temperature rose, it was already over 35 degrees, Duke implemented another fascinating technique. He began digging small holes in the sand at specific points, not randomly, but in places where he apparently detected some subsurface moisture. While we didn't find water this way, the holes created small depressions of cooler air where we could rest briefly. It became clear that this was a learned and practiced technique, not natural instinct. During the third hour, my physical condition began to deteriorate noticeably. At 75 years old, my body simply doesn't process extreme heat as well as it did when I was younger. My sweat rate increased dramatically, leading to faster dehydration, and I began to experience the first signs of heat exhaustion, mild dizziness, nausea, and difficulty concentrating. Duke immediately recognized my weakened condition and completely adjusted our movement strategy. He began implementing more frequent and longer rest periods, always positioning me in the best shade available. During these periods, Duke would conduct solitary reconnaissances of the area around us, expanding our awareness of the terrain without forcing me to expend unnecessary energy. When he returned from these reconnaissances, his behavior clearly communicated his discovery. If he'd found something promising, his body would display pent-up excitement. If the area ahead presented challenges, he would return more cautiously and direct our route towards safer alternatives. The fourth hour brought our first significant discovery. Duke had smelled something that visibly excited him, and he led me to a small rocky depression where there were clear signs of water having been present in the recent past. While no liquid water was available, there was a small patch of dry vegetation and some marks on the rock that indicated runoff during rains. More importantly, Duke dug in a specific spot in this depression and found slightly damp sand about a foot deep. This discovery didn't immediately give us water, but it did provide two crucial things: hope and information. The hope that we were in an area where water occasionally existed, and the information that if we could survive until nightfall, there might be additional condensation or moisture in this area. Duke clearly understood the importance of this discovery because he established this location as our first fixed landmark, marking it with his sense of smell so we could return if necessary. As the hours passed and the sun reached its peak intensity, I estimated the temperature had exceeded 45 degrees. Duke implemented survival tactics that demonstrated a level of training far beyond my wildest imagination. He began actively searching for shadows from east-west facing rocks, ensuring we would have continuous shade as the sun moved across the sky. This isn't an instinctive technique, it's something that must be taught and practiced. Duke also began to demonstrate extremely sophisticated energy conservation behaviors. During our rest periods, he would position himself to create additional shade for me with his own body, even if it meant he himself was partially exposed to the sun. It was a calculated sacrifice that showed he understood that I, as the most vulnerable member of our team, needed additional protection. During the 5th hour, when my physical condition had deteriorated considerably, Duke made a life-saving decision. Instead of continuing to try to find an immediate exit from the desert, he established our strategy for surviving until nightfall. He found a specific rock formation that offered shade for the rest of the day, and had features that could help us through the cold night ahead. This location had several important features: continuous shade until sunset, protection from strong winds, a rocky surface that would absorb heat during the day and keep us warm at night, and an elevated position that would allow us better visibility of the surrounding area. Duke had chosen our base of operations with the precision of a seasoned military strategist. It was at this point that I made the most important decision of the next 18 hours. I stopped trying to lead our survival operation and became completely dependent on Duke's military expertise. This was a difficult decision for someone who had spent his entire life in leadership positions, but I recognized that Duke had specific knowledge for our current situation that surpassed my general experience. The 6th hour was when Duke began preparing for the night. He systematically explored the entire area around our base, identifying potential resources, escape routes if necessary, and most importantly, possible sources of water or food. During one of these explorations, Duke made our second crucial discovery. He found a small natural cave in the rock formation, just big enough for the two of us, which would offer us complete protection from the freezing desert night wind. This cave had features that Duke clearly assessed before showing it to me. It had only one entrance, making it easy to defend against nocturnal predators. It had natural ventilation that would prevent gas buildup. It was positioned to capture residual heat from the rocks at night, and most importantly, it had signs that small animals used it for shelter, indicating that it was a safe and established location. During the 7th and 8th hours, as the sun began to decline but the heat remained intense, Duke implemented our resource-conserving routine for the next 10 hours. He set specific times for small sips of water, forcing me to resist the temptation to drink more than strictly necessary. His methods were firm but gentle. He simply positioned himself between me and my water bottle after each authorized sip, physically preventing me from drinking more. Duke also began implementing body cooling techniques he had clearly learned during his missions in the Afghan desert. He showed me how to position my body against the rocks to maximize heat transfer from my body to the rock. He demonstrated how to breathe to minimize moisture loss. He even taught me a technique for reducing sweat production through minimal body movement and strategic positioning. The 9th hour brought the most difficult psychological challenge. As my physical condition deteriorated and the reality of our situation became clearer, I began to experience moments of panic and despair. Duke immediately recognized these changes in my mental state and implemented psychological support techniques that had clearly been part of his military training. He remained physically close, offering comforting contact. He looked me directly in the eyes during moments of anxiety, conveying calm and confidence. He even performed small actions that distracted me from negative thoughts, such as light play or exploring interesting objects in the area. The 10th hour marked the most critical moment of our first day in the desert. My water was gone, my energy was at its limit, and the temperature was still above 40 degrees. Duke made a desperate but calculated decision. He set out alone on an extended reconnaissance mission, leaving me in the safety of our base but risking getting lost or injured. Before leaving, he established clear communication signals. If he barked once, I was to stay where I was. If he barked 3 times in a row, I was to follow him immediately. Duke was gone for nearly an hour, the longest and scariest hour of my life. Without him, I realized completely how dependent I had become on his leadership and expertise. When I finally heard his triple bark in the distance, I gathered my last strength and followed the sound. Duke had found something extraordinary, a small natural spring no more than a trickle trickling between rocks, but fresh, clean water. This spring was located approximately 500 meters from our base, hidden in a rocky crevice that would have been impossible to find without Duke's superior olfactory guidance. The water flowed so slowly that it took us almost 2 hours to completely fill my bottle, but we had found the resource that would ensure our survival. Duke had applied water-fetching techniques taught to military dogs specifically for operations in arid environments. With our hydration situation resolved, Duke implemented the next phase of our survival plan, preparing for the night. As the sun set and the temperature began to drop rapidly, Duke led me back to our cave and began preparing for the next 8 hours of extreme cold. He collected natural insulating materials available in the area: dry leaves, small twigs, even his own naturally shedding fur. The transition from extreme heat to the intense cold of the desert is a shock to any organism, but at 75 years old, my body had a particularly difficult time adapting. Duke anticipated this problem and implemented a gradual warm-up strategy. He positioned himself close to me inside the cave, sharing his body heat, but also established gentle exercises that would keep my circulation active without expending unnecessary energy. During the early hours of the night, Duke maintained a constant vigil. He alternated between periods of resting near me and periods of patrolling the cave entrance. His ears remained constantly alert for sounds of predators or other threats. Several times during the night, Duke briefly left the cave to scout the area, always returning quickly and reassuring me with his presence. The early morning brought the most difficult moments of our entire ordeal. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, and my body was reacting poorly to the combination of residual dehydration, exhaustion, and extreme cold. I began experiencing episodes of uncontrollable shivering and moments of mental confusion. Duke realized my condition was becoming critical and took extraordinary measures to keep me warm and conscious. Duke implemented an emergency body warming technique he had clearly learned for combat situations. He positioned himself directly against me, maximizing physical contact for heat transfer. He also began physically stimulating me in a controlled manner, preventing me from entering a hypothermic stupor. His actions were precise and purposeful, not instinctive, demonstrating specific training for assisting humans in extreme conditions. As morning approached and I was at my weakest, Duke made the final decision that saved my life. Instead of waiting for me to recover enough to walk, he set out alone on a search and rescue mission. Duke had memorized our exact location in relation to the water source and key rock formations, and he knew he could find help and then guide rescuers back to me. Duke was gone for approximately 4 hours, the longest of our experience together. During this time, I used all the survival techniques he had taught me over the previous 18 hours to maintain my condition until his return. When I finally heard human voices and Duke's familiar bark, I knew our ordeal was over. Duke coordinated the rescue with impressive precision. He had found a search and rescue team that had been searching for us since the previous night, when we failed to return as planned. Duke guided the team directly to our cave, communicated our condition through specific behaviors, and even pointed out the location of the water source he had discovered. The medical team that attended to me was impressed by my relatively stable condition considering the 18 hours we had spent lost in the desert. My dehydration was significant but not critical. My body temperature was low, but within safe limits, and there were no signs of permanent damage from exposure to extreme heat or cold. The paramedics attributed my survival directly to the resource conservation and body protection techniques that Duke had implemented. Duke was examined by the emergency veterinary team and found to be in excellent condition. His superior physical condition, a result of years of military training, had enabled him not only to survive the extreme conditions but also to care for me throughout. The veterinarians noted that Duke was showing signs of stress from being in emergency operation mode for an extended period, but he had not suffered significant physical damage. The experience of being rescued after 18 hours lost in the desert with Duke fundamentally changed my perspective on many aspects of life. First, I understood that age really can be just a number if you keep your mind sharp and accept that you need to adapt your strategies to your physical limitations. Second, I learned that true partnership between humans and trained animals can overcome challenges that would be impossible to face individually. Most importantly, this experience taught me that it's never too late to discover new capabilities in yourself and others. At 75, I discovered reserves of mental resilience I didn't know I possessed. Duke, even after retiring from the military 4 years ago, demonstrated that his skills remained sharp and could be applied in civilian emergency situations. Our partnership evolved from a companionship to a true survival team. The techniques Duke taught me during our ordeal have become a permanent part of my survival knowledge. The strategic conservation of water in extreme situations, the use of natural formations for protection against the elements, the importance of constantly adapting strategies based on changing conditions, and most importantly, the value of completely trusting your partner when they have superior expertise in the current situation. In the months following our wilderness experience, Duke and I developed a dedicated training program based on the techniques we used during our survival. We began teaching others, especially senior adventurers, how to form effective partnerships with emergency-trained dogs. We discovered a significant community of older people who want to continue pushing their limits, but need strategies adapted to the physical realities of aging. The program we developed combines traditional survival techniques with specific partnership methods between humans and trained dogs. We teach how to establish effective nonverbal communication, how to recognize and interpret animals' higher instincts, how to adapt leadership strategies based on the strengths of each team member, and most importantly, how to maintain mutual trust in situations of extreme stress. The response to our program has been extraordinary. We've found that many people, not just seniors, are interested in developing deeper partnerships with animals trained for adventure and emergencies. Military veterans especially identify with our approach. Recognizing in our things began to unfold differently than planned from the moment we left our starting point in Barstow, California, on that fateful Tuesday morning. I had specifically chosen this region of the Mojave Desert for its challenging yet predictable characteristics. Or at least that's what I believed based on decades of experience in hostile environments. The location offered a perfect combination of rugged terrain, extreme temperature swings, and a complete absence of human interference, creating a natural laboratory to test the endurance limits of a 75-year-old man and his military canine companion. My planning had been meticulous during the 3 weeks leading up to the challenge. I studied detailed topographic maps of the area, consulted historical weather data for that time of year, identified visual landmarks that would allow me to navigate without relying solely on electronic devices, and most importantly, plotted a circular route that would theoretically return me to my starting point in exactly 12 hours of steady walking. It was an ambitious but calculated challenge based on my decades of experience in controlled survival situations. The equipment I carried was carefully selected to simulate a real emergency situation where resources are limited. My military backpack contained only a 1-liter water bottle, enough for 12 hours if properly managed, 3 high-calorie energy bars, my combat knife, which has been with me since Vietnam, a military mechanical compass that has never failed me, a small first aid kit with essential items, SPF 50 sunscreen, and an emergency whistle. Duke carried only his military dog collar with full identification and a small side pouch with extra water and concentrated rations. The choice to carry minimal resources wasn't out of negligence, but by design. I wanted to replicate conditions where survival depended more on knowledge, experience, and partnership than on sophisticated equipment. This philosophy had served me well during my military career and later as a survival instructor. The belief that a prepared survivor can overcome almost any adversity with the most basic resources if they apply the right principles. Duke and I had completed dozens of preparatory exercises in the months leading up to this particular challenge. We'd done 15 to 20 kilometer hikes in mountainous terrain, conducted navigation exercises where we intentionally created disorientation to test our reorientation skills, conducted water conservation drills in hot conditions, and most importantly, developed our nonverbal communication for situations where noise could attract predators or reveal our position. Each preparatory exercise had been a success, reinforcing my confidence that we were ready for this ultimate test. The Mojave Desert boasts unique characteristics that make it simultaneously fascinating and deadly. During the day, temperatures can easily exceed 50 degrees Celsius, creating conditions where dehydration can become critical within hours. At night, these same temperatures can drop below 0 degrees, creating severe thermal shock for unprepared organisms. Local fauna includes rattlesnakes, scorpions, coyotes, the occasional cougar, and a variety of insects that can transmit diseases or cause severe allergic reactions. Vegetation is sparse and often poisonous, eliminating the possibility of sustenance through local plants. More challenging than the obvious dangers are the geographic features that can disorient even experienced navigators. Similar rock formations repeat across thousands of hectares, creating visual illusions where landmarks appear to be in different positions depending on the viewing angle. Thermal mirages distort perceptions of distance and direction. Local magnetic variations can affect compasses, and deep canyons block GPS signals. It's an environment that punishes errors of judgment with potentially fatal consequences. My original strategy was relatively simple in concept but complex in execution. I would depart before dawn to maximize the hours of moderate temperature, follow a predetermined route that would take me through 3 key landmarks, manage water and energy resources to maintain consistent performance throughout the journey, and return to the starting point in the late afternoon, avoiding both the peak midday heat and the extreme cold of the night. It was a plan based on decades of experience and hundreds of similar successful exercises. Duke had been briefed on our mission through signals and commands we'd developed over our years of partnership. He understood that we would be engaged in a prolonged exercise in a hostile environment, that energy conservation would be a priority, that he should alert me to potential hazards but follow my lead for navigation, and that our partnership would be tested in ways we hadn't experienced since his active duty days in Afghanistan. His controlled enthusiasm on the morning of departure indicated that he was mentally prepared for the challenge. The first signs that something wasn't as planned appeared just 90 minutes after our departure. My first visual reference, a distinct rock formation I'd clearly identified on topographic maps and confirmed through aerial imagery, simply didn't appear on the horizon when it should have. I initially attributed this to miscalculation of time or distance, common possibilities in land navigation where small variations in terrain can affect progress speed. I consulted my compass and confirmed we were following the correct bearing. I checked my watch and confirmed we had maintained our planned pace. I surveyed the terrain around us and identified nothing that would explain the discrepancy between my calculated position and the available visual references. More worryingly, Duke had begun displaying behaviors I hadn't observed since we met. He stopped frequently, raised his head in a high alert position, sniffed the air with unusual intensity, and his ears remained constantly erect, signs that his military instincts had detected something my human experience couldn't. It was at this point that I made the decision that nearly cost us our lives. Instead of stopping completely, reassessing our position using every available method, and possibly retracing our steps until we reestablished our exact location, I decided to continue based on the confidence of my experience. I believed I could reorient myself using the next visual references on the planned route. This type of overconfidence is a common trap for people with extensive experience in any field. The tendency to rely on intuition and past experience in situations where systematic analysis would be more appropriate. Duke clearly disagreed with my decision to continue. His behavior became more insistent, attempting to communicate to me that something was fundamentally wrong with our situation. He began stopping more frequently, looking directly into my eyes with the intensity I recognized from his combat mission reports, and even attempting to steer me in directions other than the route I had chosen. Unfortunately, my leadership mindset, developed over decades of command and instruction, prevented me from recognizing that Duke possessed superior sensory information about our current situation. As we continued for another hour, the discrepancy between my planned navigation and the reality of the terrain became impossible to ignore. None of the rock formations matched the landmarks I had memorized. The general topography of the area didn't align with the maps I had studied. More alarmingly, attempts to acquire a GPS signal failed completely due to interference from local rock formations, eliminating my backup option for electronic reorientation. I was officially lost in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, with limited resources and responsibility for my companion's life. The exact moment reality set in was at 8:15 a.m., approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes after our departure. I had climbed a rocky outcrop hoping to get a better visual perspective of the area around us and possibly identify our position. From the top of this ridge, I definitively confirmed that I recognized absolutely nothing of the terrain in any direction. The rock formations, the vegetation patterns, even the general coloration of the ground were different from what I had studied on the maps. We weren't simply off the planned route. We were in a completely different area than the one we had intended to explore. Duke had followed me to the top of the ridge, but his demeanor at this point had changed dramatically. Instead of awaiting my instructions as he normally did, he assumed a military commanding stance. He positioned himself a few meters in front of me, constantly glancing in different directions as if evaluating tactical options, and when he made eye contact with me, his eyes communicated an urgency and determination I hadn't seen in years. It was as if a mental switch had been flipped, completely reactivating his combat zone survival protocols. The temperature by this point had already risen to approximately 32 degrees Celsius and was continuing to rise rapidly. My first bottle of water, planned to last until noon, was already reduced to half its original volume due to the combination of the physical exertion of climbing the rocky outcrop and the psychological stress of recognizing our critical situation. Duke, though in better physical condition due to his superior fitness and younger age, was also showing signs that the increasing heat was affecting his performance. Increased respiratory rate, constant seeking of shade during our stops, and a gradual reduction in his normal pace of movement. It was from the top of this ridge that Duke made his first independent executive decision of our entire partnership. Instead of waiting for me to determine our next course of action, he began descending in a specific direction he had clearly chosen based on criteria I didn't understand. I initially tried to call him back and assert my authority over our direction of movement, but Duke demonstrated a persistence and confidence that were impossible to ignore. He would descend a few feet, stop, look back until he confirmed I was following, and continue only when he was certain I had accepted his lead. This transfer of leadership was psychologically difficult for me. Throughout my military career and later as an instructor, I had held positions of command and responsibility. Accepting that an animal, even a highly trained one, could better judge our survival situation was a challenge to my ego and my leadership instincts. However, I recognized that Duke possessed sensory capabilities and specific training for survival in arid environments that complemented and possibly surpassed my general experience. During the third hour of our ordeal, Duke implemented our first formal survival strategy. Instead of continuing to try to find an immediate escape route, he established a movement pattern designed to conserve energy and resources, while systematically scanning our area for tactical advantages and available resources. His movements were no longer random or based on trial and error. They were methodical, organized, and clearly grounded in protocols he had learned during his military training. Duke's movement strategy was fascinating to observe. He followed a zigzag pattern that initially seemed inefficient, but I soon realized he was keeping us in the shade of the rock formations for as long as possible, minimizing our direct exposure to the increasingly intense sun. His stops were strategically placed in areas with superior natural ventilation, allowing our bodies to cool off briefly before continuing. It was clear this wasn't natural canine intuition, but rather the application of learned and practiced techniques. Duke also began implementing systematic reconnaissance of the area around us. During our scheduled stops, he would conduct exploration circles in gradually widening radii, always returning to my exact location and communicating through body language what he had discovered. If he found something promising, his return was characterized by subdued excitement and attempts to guide me in the direction of discovery. If the explored area presented challenges or dangers, he would return more cautiously and direct our next move to avoid these obstacles. The fourth hour brought our first significant discovery and also definitive confirmation that Duke had specific training in locating resources in arid environments. He had detected something that visibly altered his behavior: controlled excitement, faster but still precise movements, and a particular insistence that I follow him to a specific location. When we reached the spot Duke had identified, I found a small rocky depression with clear signs of water having been present in the recent past. Although there was no immediately available liquid water in this depression, there were several features that indicated potential for moisture. Dry vegetation that had clearly been green recently, markings on the rocks indicating water flow during rainfall, soil with a different color suggesting higher moisture content, and most importantly, Duke had identified a specific spot where he began digging with determination and purpose. Approximately a foot below the surface, he exposed sand that was visibly wetter than the surrounding soil. This discovery was crucial not only for the potential resources it represented, but also because it confirmed that Duke possessed water detection abilities that were a direct result of specific military training. Locating water sources in arid environments is a specialized skill that must be taught and practiced. It is not a natural instinct, even for dogs with a superior sense of smell. The fact that Duke identified this area through signals that my human senses could not detect demonstrated that his training had included sophisticated desert survival techniques. Duke established this depression as our first fixed landmark, clearly marking it with his sense of smell and demonstrating behaviors that indicated he considered this location strategically important. He communicated to me through actions that we should remember this location for potential future returns. More importantly, he began using this point as a base to systematically expand our exploration of the surrounding area, always maintaining a spatial orientation that would allow us to return if necessary. As the sun reached its peak intensity and temperatures soared above 40 degrees Celsius, Duke implemented the next phase of our survival strategy. Instead of continuing to search for an immediate exit, he focused on finding shelter that would allow us to survive the most dangerous part of the day. His criteria for shelter selection were specific and clearly based on training: complete sun protection, adequate ventilation, a defensible position, and the potential to keep us warm during the cold night that would inevitably follow. The search for shelter revealed another impressive aspect of Duke's training. He wasn't content with simple shade or partial protection. He specifically sought formations that offered multiple tactical advantages. The site he finally selected had characteristics a military strategist would approve of: continuous shade regardless of the sun's position, multiple escape routes if necessary, an elevated position offering visibility of the surrounding area, protection from strong winds, and a rocky surface that would absorb heat during the day to warm us at night. During our 5th hour in the desert, Duke made the executive decision that likely saved our lives. Recognizing that my physical condition was deteriorating more rapidly than his due to my age and lower resistance to extreme heat, he abandoned any immediate escape strategy and established our current location as a base of operations for long-term survival. This decision demonstrated not only superior tactical intelligence, but also extraordinary loyalty. He chose to accept greater personal risks to maximize our collective chances of survival. Implementing this fixed position survival strategy allowed Duke to apply the full spectrum of his military skills. He established security perimeters, identified and cataloged all available resources in the area, created optimized movement routes within our zone of operations, and most importantly, began specific preparations for the multiple phases of challenge we would face in the coming hours. Surviving the extreme heat of the day, transitioning to the extreme cold of the night, maintaining limited resources for an extended period, and preserving our physical and mental condition for an eventual escape or rescue operation. The moment I fully grasped the gravity of our situation was when Duke began behaviors that clearly indicated preparation for a prolonged emergency operation. He was no longer simply trying to guide us back to safety. He was implementing protocols for multi-day survival if necessary. This realization was simultaneously terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because it confirmed that we were in real and immediate danger. Comforting because Duke had specific training for this very situation and had taken full responsibility for our survival. The critical first hours of our emergency began the exact moment I accepted that we were truly lost in the Mojave Desert, with no known visual landmarks and limited resources that would need to be managed with military precision to ensure our survival. The clock struck 8:30 a.m. when this reality fully sank in, and from that moment on, every decision we made would have direct and potentially fatal consequences for both of us. Duke had grasped the gravity of our situation long before I did, and his military instincts were already in full effect, implementing survival protocols that I was only beginning to recognize and understand. The first physical manifestation of our critical situation was the onset of dehydration symptoms in my 75-year-old body. Although I had carefully managed my water intake during the early morning hours, the combination of physical exertion, the psychological stress of recognizing we were lost, and especially the increasing desert heat, had accelerated my loss of bodily fluids far beyond my expectations. At 75, my body simply doesn't process and retain fluids as efficiently as it did when I was young, and this deficiency becomes dramatically more dangerous in extreme heat. The first symptoms I experienced were subtle but unmistakable for someone with my experience in survival situations. An intense thirst that was not proportional to the amount of water I had consumed, a dry mouth that persisted even after drinking, a gradual decrease in saliva production, and most alarmingly, a reduction in the frequency of urination combined with a change in urine color when I did. These signs indicated that my body was already implementing water conservation measures, redirecting fluids from less essential systems to maintain heart and brain function. Duke noticed my deteriorating condition long before I fully recognized the severity of my symptoms. His behaviors changed subtly, but decisively. He began implementing more frequent stops in shaded areas, established a slower pace of movement that conserved my energy, and most importantly, took active responsibility for managing our water resources. When I tried to drink more than he considered appropriate, Duke would literally position himself between me and my water bottle, physically preventing me from consuming more resources than our situation permitted. Duke's direct intervention in resource management was initially frustrating to me, but I quickly recognized that he was applying resource conservation principles he had learned during his military deployments in Afghanistan. In environments where water is scarce and resupply uncertain, rigorous management of liquid resources can mean the difference between survival and death. Duke had been trained to recognize signs of dehydration in soldiers under his care and implement preventative measures even when doing so conflicted with the immediate wishes of the people he was protecting. Duke's water conservation strategy was sophisticated and clearly based on specific military protocols. He established fixed intervals between hydration periods, specific amounts I could consume in each session, and most importantly, he correlated our water intake with our rate of physical activity and heat exposure. During periods of active movement, he allowed slightly higher fluid intake. During periods of rest in the shade, he reduced the amounts allowed to maximize the total duration of our resources. As the hours progressed and the heat intensified, Duke began implementing body cooling techniques that were clearly the result of specialized training for operations in desert environments. He demonstrated to me how to position my body in relation to the rock formations to maximize heat transfer from my body to the rocks, which remained cooler than the surrounding air. He showed me how to breathe in a controlled manner to minimize moisture loss through exhalation. Most impressively, he implemented a body movement technique that significantly reduced my sweat production through minimal gestures and strategic positioning. During the second critical hour, approximately 9:30 to 10:30 a.m., Duke made his first crucial discovery that would completely change our survival strategy. He had detected signs of water that my human senses were completely incapable of perceiving. His behavior changed dramatically: controlled excitement, more purposeful movements, and a particular insistence that I follow him to a specific location he had identified through methods that remained mysterious to me at the time. The site Duke guided me to was a natural depression between rock formations where visual signs indicated water had been present at some point recently. There was dry vegetation that had clearly been green until recently, erosion marks on the rocks indicating water flow, and most importantly, variations in soil color and texture that suggested higher moisture content below the surface. Duke had identified these signs through a combination of a superior sense of smell and specific training in detecting water resources in arid environments. The technique Duke used to explore this site demonstrated sophisticated military training. He didn't dig randomly, hoping to find water, but rather identified specific spots where the probability of finding moisture was mathematically superior based on local topography, natural drainage patterns, and olfactory cues that only his superior sensory ability could detect. When he began digging at a particular spot, it was with determination and confidence that indicated certainty, not hope. Approximately 40 centimeters below the surface, Duke exposed soil that was visibly wetter than anything we had encountered to date. While not immediately usable liquid water, this moisture represented real hope that water resources might be available in this area if we applied the correct techniques. More importantly, the discovery confirmed that Duke possessed water detection abilities that were the result of specific training, not natural instinct, and that he could potentially find additional resources as our situation evolved. Duke established this location as our first strategic landmark, clearly marking it with his sense of smell so we could easily return if necessary. He communicated to me through body language that he considered this area important to our long-term survival, and that we should incorporate it into any strategy we developed for the coming hours. This discovery shifted our situation from hopelessness to cautious hope, and allowed Duke to expand his strategy to include more aggressive exploration of the surrounding area. During the third critical hour, from 10:30 to 11:30, Duke implemented the most complex phase of our survival operation. Recognizing that my physical condition was deteriorating more rapidly than his due to my age and lower resistance to extreme heat, he made the executive decision to abandon any immediate escape strategy and focus entirely on establishing conditions that would maximize our chances of survival during the rapidly approaching most dangerous period of the day. The implementation of this strategy revealed Duke's most impressive military training. He was no longer simply reacting to our emergency situation, but rather proactively planning for multiple contingencies that could develop in the coming hours. He established specific criteria for shelter selection, including complete sun protection, adequate ventilation, a defensible position against potential predators, proximity to the water sources he had identified, and the ability to keep us warm during the frigid night that would inevitably follow. Duke's shelter selection process was methodical and impressive to observe. He systematically explored multiple options in our area, evaluating each based on criteria he had clearly learned during military operations in similar environments in Afghanistan. He wasn't content with simple shade or partial protection, but specifically looked for formations that offered multiple tactical advantages that would serve our needs during different phases of the 24-hour cycle unfolding before us. The site Duke ultimately selected as our base of operations had characteristics that a seasoned military strategist would fully approve of. It offered continuous shade regardless of the sun's position during the day, had multiple escape routes available if we faced predator threats, provided a slightly elevated position that would give us visibility of the surrounding area, had natural protection from strong winds that could be problematic at night, and most importantly, consisted of a rocky surface that would absorb solar heat during the day and keep us warm during the chilly early morning hours. During this third hour, Duke also implemented our first formal energy conservation routine. He established specific periods of activity and rest that would maximize our endurance for the entire survival period ahead. During periods of activity, he kept me focused on specific tasks that would contribute to our safety and comfort. During periods of rest, he positioned me to maximize body cooling and energy recovery. The fourth critical hour, from 11:30 a.m. to noon, presented the most severe challenge we had faced to date. The temperature had risen dramatically, easily exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, and my physical condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The symptoms of dehydration I had experienced during the previous hours intensified significantly, and I began experiencing the first signs of heat exhaustion, a potentially fatal condition for people of any age, but particularly dangerous for elderly individuals like myself. The symptoms of heat exhaustion I began experiencing included intermittent dizziness that forced me to sit down frequently, nausea that made it difficult to keep food or water down, increasing difficulty concentrating that affected my ability to make rational decisions, and a general feeling of weakness that made each physical movement more difficult than the last. Most alarmingly, I began experiencing moments of mental confusion where I would temporarily lose awareness of our situation or the actions I needed to take. Duke immediately recognized my deteriorating condition and implemented emergency measures that saved my life during this critical phase. He forced me to remain in the best shade available, physically preventing me